night, as we said, just a few hours away. The morning in Las Vegas, of course, in a city that really never sleeps, just like New York City. The challenges of all this, how should we feel about going to a casino or a hotel property?
Well, it wouldn't be at the top of my list. I think crowding a lot of people into indoor settings is higher risk right now, and doing it for purely recreational purposes isn't a top priority. And so if you're thinking about what to prioritize in terms of reopening a casino wouldn't be at the top end of the list. Now, I understand how important these casinos are to the Nevada economy, so obviously they prioritize them differently than another city or state would. But it's a higher risk setting. Anything done indoors, in groups, in crowds, with a diverse crowd is higher risk.
Let's talk about the risk. You know, we've seen these protests in many cities around the country. How concerned are you about a spread of the virus in those communities, among those crowds, and that leading to a spike in cases that otherwise may not have existed?
Well, you're certainly going to see cases come out of these mass gatherings, but we have a lot of spread notwithstanding these protests that we've seen over the last week. Florida recorded 1,300 cases, the largest single daily toll since April 15th. Arizona recorded 1,000 hospitalizations yesterday. They have a surge in cases underway. We see rising cases in Tennessee, North Carolina, Arkansas, South Carolina. Georgia's recording a higher number of cases. We see cases going up and hospitalizations going up. Texas and Houston, we see rising hospitalizations there. So there's a lot of parts of the country that have a lot of infection right now where we see cases going up. And it's not just cases going up because testing's going up. We see hospitalizations going up as well. And so there's a lot of infection all over the place. And if we continue on this current path and we have this burn of infection through the summer, and we sort of hobble through the summer with a high rate of infection, that sets up a lot of risk for the fall. Even if we don't get a full-blown epidemic this summer and we just kind of stay on our current trajectory where we see rising cases throughout the summer or we stay at current levels, that's a lot of infection around the country. There's 20,000 infections a day right now. They're getting diagnosed. That's probably 200,000 infections because we're only diagnosing 1 in 10 cases probably. So that's a lot of people still getting sick from this.
Wow, those are big numbers. There's news tonight, and let's talk about a vaccine. Let's try and advance this story if we could. There is news tonight that the Trump administration has selected 5 vaccine candidates as finalists. Your reaction to that news?
Well, look, I think that this is proceeding rapidly, the development of these vaccines, and the major pharmaceutical companies are all in this game. All the companies with vaccine programs are now in this market. And they've been able to advance these programs very quickly, really at historic speed. And that's very encouraging. I think in terms of the 5 selections the administration made, they chose 3 vaccines that are based on vectors, viral vector platforms, 2 adenoviral vector platforms, and then a platform from Merck that they use for their Ebola vaccine using what we call Indiana virus, a different virus that largely affects cattle. And then 2 mRNA approaches where they're using mRNA, the genetic material from the virus, to deliver the sequence for the protein that is the spike protein that you want to develop antibodies against. And Pfizer's one of those entrants with an mRNA approach. I'm on the board of Pfizer. I think if I was trying to round that out, I would have tried to reach for some older technology to that mix. So these are relatively new platforms. There's never been a vaccine developed with an mRNA platform. The only vaccine that's been developed with a viral vector platform of this nature is an Ebola vaccine that Merck developed with the same platform they're using here. I might have tried to throw into that mix protein-based vaccines like what Sanofi's working on or Novavax is working on. That's older technology or older styles of approaches, even though they're predicated on newer platforms. The idea of delivering just the protein to a patient's an older approach, and so it's de-risked in some respects. And so if you're trying to round out your bets, you make some bets on some of the more novel technology that perhaps can deliver better immunity. But you also might bet on a couple of older style approaches as well.
Are you afraid we're missing an opportunity by not doing that? And do you have any reason why we wouldn't be?
I don't know why we're not. I think it would have been prudent to include in the mix some of those more tried and true approaches. Now, it could be that those vaccines weren't judged to be far enough along to be in this first tranche. Now, judging from the outside, it would appear that Sanofi and Novavax are equidistant to some of the 5 that were selected, but it's hard to tell. If you look at what the Chinese are doing, they're using very old-style approaches to their vaccines. They're using an activated virus, and that's likely to be less immunogenic. It's likely to induce a less robust immune response. But they could perhaps get to market sooner with those older approaches. And if your goal is to get shots in arms in time for the fall epidemic, and we might have an epidemic in the fall, and that's what we have to guard against, the Chinese might beat us there with their vaccines by taking a more tried and true approach. And even a vaccine that's partially protective might be sufficient at staving off the worst outcomes if we do have widespread virus in the fall, which is a risk. It's not a sure conclusion, but it's a risk.
Yeah, it's one thing to have a vaccine. It's another thing to have it widely adopted by our population. We have an exclusive CNBC poll, Dr. Gottlieb, that says only 38% say they'd definitely get a COVID vaccine. Does that surprise you, and does it concern you?
No, it's consistent with what we see with other vaccines. About 30% of people get the shingles vaccine, about 45% who are eligible get the flu vaccine. And those are at the high end. So a lot of vaccines are less than that. Pediatric vaccines are higher only because they're mandatory to enter into school. If we can get about 40% of the population vaccinated for COVID, that's probably enough, because by the time we get these vaccines to market, probably at least 15 to 20% of the population will have had COVID. Right now, it's probably about 5%, but the doubling time for this epidemic is every 50 or 60 days. And so by the end of September, probably 15% of the population will have had this virus if we just continue on our current trajectory all through the summer. And so you couple 15% of the population that's had the virus, or 20%, with a 40% vaccination rate, that gets you to enough immunity in the population to probably hold back certainly an epidemic and wide propagation.